There's a moment, right between finishing a task and remembering what you were about to do next, where your mind drifts into dangerous territory. That space is where my problems started. Not on some dramatic rainy night or in a whispered phone call, but right in the middle of reorganizing the garage. Now, I know, nobody ever finds anything good in the garage unless you're into vintage tools or spiders. But I wasn't digging around for secrets or trying to spy. I was looking for a power strip. It had been a Saturday, the kind of gray Tennessee afternoon that makes you question whether time still matters. Olivia had driven off earlier to run some errands, a phrase that, for her, included anything from buying throw pillows to getting into existential debates with strangers at the farmer's market. I didn't ask. I was in charge of the storage shelves. As I moved an old tote labeled Christmas stuff, maybe, I knocked over a box filled with Olivia's art school leftovers. She used to be a painter back in college, a real brush in the hair, turpentine in the coffee mug type. Then one day, she just stopped. Claimed she'd said all she needed to say with acrylic. That was 10 years ago. So you can imagine my surprise when, buried beneath crusted tubes of paint and 3 broken pallets, I found a fresh sketchbook. I opened it mostly out of boredom. Flipping through the first few pages, I found nothing remarkable. Some charcoal trees, a guy on a bike, maybe a goat, or a very large dog in a sweater. I couldn't tell. But then, around page 9, things got specific. Let's just say it was very clearly a man. Same guy. Over and over. Different poses. None of them clothed. And one of them, I kid you not, was reclining on a set of stairs we didn't even have in our house. I counted 7 sketches in total. All of them. Bold jawline. That smug, slightly crooked smile you'd only draw if you knew exactly how it looked from up close. Now, I'm no detective, and I'm certainly not an artist, but I do know one thing. Olivia hadn't picked up a pencil for nearly a decade. But here was this mystery Adonis, captured in loving, shadowed detail, like some Greek statue had come to life and started modeling in my garage. I sat there, holding the sketchbook like it had personally insulted me, when Olivia walked in, right on cue, carrying a bag of wooden coat hangers and a cucumber that looked wildly disappointed in its life choices. "Hey, babe," she chirped, brushing past me like I wasn't sitting in a heap of emotional confusion and dried glitter glue. "Did you find the extension cord?" "Found something," I muttered, flipping the sketchbook closed with more drama than necessary. She didn't even glance at it. Just raised an eyebrow and said, "Don't go digging in my boxes, Raymond. That's where dreams go to die." Now, I consider myself a patient man. I once spent 4 months trying to grow basil from seed. I've driven to IKEA twice on a Saturday. But in that moment, I felt like I'd accidentally stumbled into someone else's novel. You know, the kind where the clueless husband pieces together signs of betrayal through metaphorical fig trees and broken compasses. Except I had a charcoal naked man and no idea how to ask, so, who's the guy with the particularly well-defined triceps? Instead, I followed her into the kitchen, sketchbook tucked under my arm like a forgotten tax form. Olivia, bless her indifferent heart, was slicing that sad cucumber, humming the chorus of a song she only ever hummed when she was lying. "Oh, that? Just some studies," she said when I finally asked. "You know, practice, muscle structure, shadow depth. I've been taking a night class." "A night class?" I repeated. She nodded. "Figure drawing. Wednesdays and Fridays. Our instructor used to be a Cirque du Soleil performer. Very flexible. Also vegan." And just like that, she turned back to the cucumber as if we weren't talking about a sketchbook filled with The Bachelor, Anatomy Edition. I wanted to laugh. I really did. It was just so polite. So absurdly civilized. My wife was drawing detailed images of a man with thighs like ancient tree trunks, and the best she could offer me was shadow depth. So I played fool, nodded, said something like, "Good for you, getting back into it," which she mistook for support and responded with, "Yeah, it's been freeing. I feel like I'm finally breathing again." Now, you might be wondering, "Raymond, why didn't you ask more questions? Demand answers? Flip the kitchen table for dramatic effect?" But here's the thing. When you're on the edge of a revelation, sometimes it's more interesting to lean in and let the show unfold. Besides, flipping tables is hard on the back, and we just refinished it last month. So I waited, like a man standing in a minefield, unsure whether to tiptoe forward or fake a heart attack. The real punch came later. Not from her. From someone I hadn't seen in almost a year, Teddy Bennett. Teddy, the one guy in town who made everyone else look like they were permanently stuck in the clearance aisle. Real estate broker. Like to say, I sell dreams, as if dreams came with granite countertops and unnecessary wine fridges. He walked into the hardware store while I was picking up cock, wearing a scarf like he'd just flown in from Milan. It was 68 degrees outside. Gave me one of those grins, tight-lipped, all teeth, no soul. Ray, he said, I've heard Olivia's back at it. Good for her, man. She's really found her inspiration again. He said it with that smirk. The kind that doesn't just say, I know something you don't, but rather, I am the something you don't. And just like that, it clicked. Teddy had stairs like those. A big spiral staircase in his overpriced downtown condo. And, well, he had the jawline too. And the ego. Oh boy, did he have the ego. It practically entered a room before he did. So that's how I found out. Not from a text. Not from some tragic dinner confession. Not from her sobbing into a wine glass. Nope. From a sketchbook buried under plastic snowmen and a smug real estate agent wearing a scarf in spring. And honestly, I admired the theatricality of it all. If you're going to blow up a marriage, might as well do it with a bit of artistic flair. At least she didn't write poetry about him. That would have been unbearable. But that's not the end. Not even close. Because once you realize the ship's sinking, you don't just jump overboard. You grab the popcorn, lean on the railing, and see how many lifeboats they forgot to pack. And me? Well, I had plans. Not for revenge. Just renovation. Emotional, personal, maybe a little drywall related. You know what's a fun way to spend a Tuesday afternoon? Sitting in the waiting room of a tax consultant's office while your marriage quietly slides off a cliff. Not in flames. That would be too cinematic. More like on 4 bald tires, slowly, with a squeak you keep telling yourself isn't your problem. The reason I was there had nothing to do with taxes, by the way. I've been using the same guy, Ed Roman, for 8 years, and he still triple checks if I'm the one who claimed miscellaneous expenses for $14.50 at Stacy's Tires and Tarot. I was there because Teddy Bennett, yes, scarf-wearing monument to self-confidence, had recently posted a photo online with what he referred to as a creative genius who fuels my mornings. I recognized the hands in the picture. Now, I'll admit, it's a weird thing to recognize someone by their hands. But Olivia has this habit of painting her nails with colors that sound like failed poetry titles. Things like Muted Eclipse or Whispering Bronze. And there they were, her fingers wrapped around a coffee mug shaped like a mini saxophone. I'm not proud of this, but I zoomed in like a retired detective who just remembered how to use his reading glasses. Anyway, the tax office was across the street from Teddy's real estate building, and I figured if I loitered near the espresso bar he had installed in the lobby, because of course he did, I might stumble into something useful. Or someone. And if not, Ed would think I was finally doing something proactive with my finances. After 23 minutes of pretending to compare interest rates on home refinancing brochures, Olivia walked in. She didn't see me, which wasn't surprising, considering she was busy being on speakerphone, talking to someone named Mallory about portfolio direction and brand harmony. Olivia's voice changed when she talked in public for work. It went from mildly amused to professionally whimsical. Like she might sell you a throw pillow and then lead a TED talk about it. She breezed past me and headed for the elevators, where Teddy was already waiting. He had on sunglasses. Indoors. Because sunlight, apparently, is for people with modest incomes. What happened next didn't involve any dramatic gestures or suspicious embraces. They stood there, side by side, like co-workers about to pitch something that required both exposed brick and string lights. What caught my attention, though, was the cardboard tube Olivia was carrying. Not a regular document tube, no. This one had her handwriting on it, scribbled in Sharpie, studio copy, final. A tube like that would have made sense if she were still in school, or doing anything remotely related to art. But for the past 5 years, Olivia's version of studio time had involved streaming shows about Scandinavian furniture restoration while conceptualizing brand tone from the couch. So naturally, I followed them. Well, not immediately. I'm not a lunatic. I waited until they disappeared behind the glass doors of the elevator, and then casually walked to the front desk like someone who had a meeting with someone named something like Michelle. The receptionist looked at me with the kind of blank enthusiasm reserved for gym tours and jury duty. Can I help you? I'm just here to drop something off for Teddy, I lied, because it seemed easier than explaining I was investigating a potential creative scandal involving my possibly adulterous wife and a man who once used the phrase synergy of space without irony. The receptionist, whose name tag said Brittany in all caps like she might sue you for mispronouncing it, told me Teddy was in a private consultation and couldn't be disturbed. But as fate would have it, I caught sight of the conference room down the hall and recognized Olivia's bag sitting on the floor beside the chair. The bag had a sticker on it that said, "Let it go," which she thought was hilarious even though I told her it sounded like a breakup-themed children's book. And that's when my plan shifted. I didn't confront. I didn't accuse. I took a photo of the bag, the tube, and the conference room with a timestamp. Then I walked out like someone who just realized they parked in a tow zone. Later that evening, I decided to approach the situation with the subtlety of a man holding a handful of puzzle pieces and pretending he wasn't building a picture of his own humiliation. I asked Olivia how the marketing pitch went. She blinked. "What pitch?" "You know," I said, casually leaning against the kitchen counter like a man who hadn't mentally rehearsed this moment since 2 p.m., the one with Teddy. "You were holding a project tube labeled studio copy." The pause was microscopic, but it existed. A blip. She recovered fast, like someone who's had practice. "Oh, that was just something I was reviewing for Mallory. A rebrand proposal. Totally boring. You'd fall asleep reading the first line." Which was fair, considering I once nodded off during an insurance commercial. Still, I nodded like I bought it and changed the subject. Because again, no dramatic explosions. Just data collection. That night, while she scrolled through what I assumed were Instagram reels of antique candle making or minimalist salads, I started my next phase, reach out to Greg Loden. Greg is a graphic designer I used to play poker with. He's also a mild conspiracy theorist with a soft spot for failed fonts and local gossip. I sent him the photo of the tube and asked, "Does this look familiar?" Greg replied within 6 minutes. "That's Olivia's handwriting. She submitted this to the Artisan Collective exhibit downtown. She's one of the feature artists." Big deal. Didn't you know? No, I did not. Because as far as I was aware, my wife hadn't picked up a paintbrush or spoken the words gallery space since 2011, when she declared that modern art had lost its moral compass. So I followed the link Greg sent me, and there it was. A webpage, clean and smug, listing Olivia Norwood as one of the voices of modern perspective. Next to her name, a preview of one of the featured pieces, a faceless man standing in front of a spiral staircase, arms crossed, with a faint smile and what appeared to be a real estate brochure in one hand. The piece was titled, "Unspoken Contracts." And folks, I'm not a particularly sentimental guy. I don't cry at movies. I once sneezed during a wedding ceremony. But I sat there on our couch, looking at that image, and I started to laugh. Not the kind of laugh that says, "This is funny," but the kind that slips out when reality pokes you in the ribs and says, "But you didn't see that coming." Because what do you even say at that point? Your wife didn't just cheat. She didn't just hide it. She turned it into an art show. She sketched it, framed it, titled it with passive aggression, and put it on a wall for strangers to admire while sipping carbonated hibiscus. And she did it all without blinking. And that, right there, was when the story really started to get interesting. But I wasn't going to stop her. Not yet. I had a plan. But first, I wanted a copy of that exhibit program. Framed, right next to our diploma wall. Why not? Art deserves context. The first person I told was Martin, my neighbor, who once accidentally nailed his own hand to a deck while explaining load-bearing principles to a YouTube audience of 12. He's not exactly who you'd call wise counsel, but he's enthusiastic and doesn't interrupt, which is rare in men who own tool belts and have opinions on gutters. We were standing in his driveway, next to his half-painted canoe, don't ask, when I showed him the screenshot of Olivia's gallery listing. He stared at it like it was a word problem with 3 steps too many. So, he finally said, squinting, "You married an artist and didn't know it?" "I married a woman who said people who paint in grayscale probably fear commitment." Bold. She said art galleries are just white rooms where insecure people pretend to understand shapes. And now she is the shape. Exactly. Martin nodded like a man who just realized he forgot to turn off his hose. "You gonna go to the show?" "No. I'm going to buy one of the paintings and request the receipt in both our names." He tilted his head. "That's not revenge, that's paperwork." Exactly. By Thursday, I had a plan. Not the grand kind where you rent a billboard, but the satisfying kind that involves scheduling, dry wit, and an uncomfortable amount of printer ink. I made an appointment at the local co-op print shop, the kind where every employee has 2 degrees and wears cardigans even in July. I walked in with a flash drive and a printed-out screenshot of the exhibit's webpage, featuring Olivia's bio beneath a headshot she clearly hadn't updated since her I love oversized glasses and opinions about cold brew phase. The employee, his name tag said Devin, but it was written in lowercase like he wasn't sure of himself, plugged in the flash drive, and raised an eyebrow. You want this in what size? Big enough to make someone feel seen, but small enough to make them uncomfortable. So, 24 by 36. Perfect. I paid in cash and asked for a duplicate. Devin didn't blink. Back home, I went into the spare bedroom, which we still called the office, even though it had become the graveyard of unused fitness equipment and failed DIY storage solutions. I cleared a wall, hung both frame prints, and placed a small wooden plaque underneath them that read, "Recognition is the sincerest form of repetition." It didn't mean anything, but it sounded vaguely important, which was the whole point. Later that night, Olivia came home from what she claimed was strategy drinks with Mallory, a phrase that should be classified under fiction in most dictionaries. Her heels made the same sound on the floor they always did, like she was constantly arriving somewhere important even if it was just our living room. She walked past the office without noticing. I waited. The next morning, I made coffee and left the door wide open. Olivia walked in, holding her phone, probably scrolling through monochrome inspiration quotes or whatever mood boards people look at when they're avoiding eye contact with their lives. She stopped. "Raymond," she said, her voice hovering between suspicious and disappointed, which honestly sounded like most of her reactions to things I did. "Yes. What is this?" "A tribute." She glanced between the two prints, then read the plaque. "This isn't funny." "I didn't say it was." "You framed the gallery page? You're the one who said we needed more art in the house." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Olivia had a very specific face for moments when she was unsure whether to be flattered or insulted. This was that face. "You could have just asked me about it," she said, which was rich considering the last time I asked her a direct question, I got a 2-minute monologue about emotional bandwidth and visual storytelling. "I did. You said it was a rebranding project." She stared at me. "So this is you." "What? Punishing me?" "No, this is me curating. You're the one always going on about intentional spaces." She didn't say anything. She just stood there, arms crossed, looking at a blown-up version of her own public lie, framed with the kind of precision usually reserved for graduation diplomas and restraining orders. Then, because awkward tension only works for so long in a house with very average insulation, she turned around and left the room. That evening, I got an email from the Artisan Collective confirming a purchase request for Olivia Norwood's piece Unspoken Contracts. I used her joint tax ID to get the spouse discount, because I believe in fiscal responsibility even in the middle of creative betrayal. The next day, I showed up at the gallery. It was in a building that used to be a printing press, then a yoga studio, then some kind of organic skincare lab that mysteriously closed after one too many lavender incidents. The gallery smelled faintly of paint and ambition. I signed in under Ray Norwood, which I hadn't used since that brief phase where Olivia insisted I should brand myself better. It felt like putting on a costume that didn't fit, which was fitting considering the circumstances. There were 12 pieces in the exhibit, including Olivia's. Most were abstract, the kind that make you wonder if the artist ran out of time or just gave up halfway through. Then I got to hers. It was bigger in person, which I'm sure was the point. The staircase, the faceless man, the smug tilt of the shoulders, every detail screamed, "I'm with someone more interesting than my husband, but I still need him to notice." I stood there, sipping complimentary water from a compostable cup, and waited. Olivia arrived 10 minutes later, dressed like she was auditioning for a documentary about disruptive women in creative industries. She didn't see me right away. She was too busy accepting praise from a woman in a jumpsuit who introduced herself as a visual brand doula. When she finally did notice me, her face did that flicker thing again. Not fear. Not embarrassment. Just the quiet irritation of someone who thought they'd locked a drawer only to find it wide open. "Raymond," she said, as if I just turned up to her office wearing a bathrobe. "I bought the painting," I said, sipping water like it was expensive whiskey. "You what?" "I bought it. Yours. Unspoken Contracts. It's being delivered Tuesday." She blinked. "Why?" "I needed something for the garage. That wall's been empty for years." There's a silence that happens when someone realizes they lost control of a story they were writing for themselves. She didn't say anything else. Just nodded once, sharply, and turned back to her visual brand doula. As I walked out, I passed a couple looking at a piece titled Delayed Potential. It was just 3 beige circles and a red line. The woman whispered, "It's about capitalism." Maybe it was. Maybe Olivia's piece was about longing, or rebellion, or some grand internal evolution. Or maybe, just maybe, it was about nothing at all. And honestly, that was starting to feel like the most honest thing in the whole exhibit. There's nothing more clarifying than being ignored by someone who's trying very hard to look mysterious in their own kitchen. For the past 3 mornings, Olivia had been performing her silent routine like a one-woman theater piece. It involved exaggerated sighing, scrolling through her tablet like it owed her rent money, and standing dramatically by the window as if waiting for an emotional breeze. I didn't interrupt. I simply timed how long she could hold her cup of coffee without drinking it. Her record was 11 minutes, during which she refreshed her inbox 6 times. She hadn't brought up the gallery purchase. She hadn't mentioned the framed webpage I still hadn't taken down. She hadn't even asked why I started watching documentaries on fraud cases with the volume way too high. I figured if she wasn't going to talk, I could fill the air with the soothing sound of white-collar consequences. On Friday, I received a call from someone named Noreen at the gallery. She informed me, in a tone that suggested she wore scarves indoors for credibility, that there was a conflict regarding the delivery of unspoken contracts. Apparently, Olivia had requested the painting be archived for future shows and had added a handwritten note requesting it not be sent to any address beginning with Southwick. That would be our street. I told Noreen I would swing by and pick it up myself. She sounded unsure. I told her I'd bring my receipt and a polite attitude. That seemed to settle it. The painting, when rolled up, was surprisingly light, almost disappointingly so. I had expected it to carry more weight, emotionally or otherwise, but in person, it just looked like something that might get discounted in a high-end furniture store's urban chic section. I took it home and set it on the dining room table. Olivia walked past it twice and said nothing. On the 3rd pass, she paused, then kept going. I could practically hear her blinking. The next day, I stopped by the framing store. Again, Devin was there, still lowercase, still unflinchingly neutral. I asked for a custom shadow box for the painting. I requested a brass plate that read, "Property of R. Norwood, collected April 9th, 3:17 p.m., do not exhibit without permission." Devin paused long enough to silently express the weight of his disapproval, then typed it in exactly as I said it. Back home, I hung the finished piece in the laundry room, directly across from the dryer. The location wasn't symbolic. It was just the only spot with enough space and good lighting. Olivia noticed it while fetching a sweater she never wore but claimed to be thinking about styling. "You're hanging it in here?" she asked, as if I'd nailed it to the back of a toilet seat. "It's the only room that still appreciates creative expression." She stared at me like I was a malfunctioning appliance, then left without taking the sweater. Later that week, I received an email from a woman named Tessa Fenwick. She identified herself as a curator for a new installation project focused on duality in contemporary expression. I wasn't sure what that meant, but she wanted permission to include unspoken contracts in a traveling showcase. The email was addressed to both Olivia and me, but clearly written with the assumption that I was either irrelevant or recently deceased. I replied with a single sentence. I would consider loaning the piece, but only if my name is listed as its legal owner and Olivia does not speak at the event. No response. The next morning, Olivia casually brought up Tessa's name while pretending to check the mail. I say pretending because she hadn't brought an actual mail in 4 years. "She's just being polite," Olivia said. "That email was meant for me. She CC'd me. By mistake. She called me the legal owner. She was being generous. She asked me for release papers. I could ask for a blender, and that doesn't make me a chef. That's not how ownership works." She narrowed her eyes. "Are you seriously going to block a professional opportunity because you're sulking?" "Sulkers don't order brass plates, Olivia." She didn't respond. She just walked away again, making a noise halfway between a scoff and an exhale, like I'd ruined her plans for a brooding montage. What she didn't know was that I had also sent Tessa a follow-up email. I asked a simple question. "How did you find this piece?" She replied quickly. "One of our scouts attended the Artisan Collective exhibit and submitted a short list. Your piece was selected not only for its composition but for the accompanying plaque and installation context, which we found refreshingly honest." So there it was. Olivia's big moment had been sparked not by her brushstrokes, but by my passive-aggressive interior design. I printed that email out and tucked it into the folder I'd started keeping. I labeled it Creative Credit, Unintentional. The next phase wasn't about escalation. It was about management. I began cataloging other pieces Olivia had submitted over the years, ones she claimed were just experiments or conceptual drafts. Most had been posted anonymously or under pseudonyms. I compiled a spreadsheet. She had a whole digital portfolio on a site registered under the name L.N. Gray. I'm not a tech wizard, but the reuse of the same 3 filter presets and her tendency to photograph her work beside a specific mug gave it away. The mug said, "Designers drink black coffee," which I bought for her during our second Christmas together and deeply regret. She had 7 pieces listed for sale. I purchased 2 under an alias and requested they be shipped to the office at Martin's Auto Shop. He signed for them without asking questions, then wrapped them in mechanic paper and handed them over like he was returning stolen goods. I framed one of the pieces, an abstract canvas with overlapping red lines and a single square that looked like it was added reluctantly, and hung it in the guest bathroom. I left a sticky note beside it that read, "Limited edition. Collector's item. Don't flush twice in a row, still broken." The other I wrapped in Olivia's old studio apron and placed it in the hall closet with a tag. "Do not open unless you're absolutely certain you're still the protagonist." She found it a few days later. Didn't ask. Didn't touch it. Just closed the closet door a little harder than necessary. That weekend, we were invited to a mutual friend's birthday party. Olivia said she had work. I went alone. At some point during the evening, someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, aren't you the guy with the painting in the gallery?" It took me a second to process. Technically, yes. They smiled. Man, that was hilarious. The brass plate? Genius. My wife took a photo and posted it with the caption "Marital feedback in high resolution." I smiled back and said nothing. There wasn't anything to say. Olivia had wanted eyes on her work. Now she had them. Every smirk, every repost, every whispered conversation by a wall she didn't own. Those belonged to me. And she knew it. She just hadn't figured out what I'd do with that knowledge yet. I was still deciding, but I had plenty of sticky notes left. The funny thing about people trying to rewrite history is they always assume no one else took notes. Olivia, for example, seemed convinced she could gradually repackage the last 6 months into something resembling a period of artistic discovery, as if what I'd witnessed was just the visual equivalent of a wellness retreat, instead of the slow-motion implosion of a person who couldn't admit she liked attention more than honesty. I wasn't offended anymore. That part had moved out and left no forwarding address. What I was now was professionally curious, which is why I started archiving things. Emails, deleted posts, drafts from her online art profiles, stuff she probably thought vanished into the digital ether once she hit remove. But nothing on the internet is ever truly gone, especially when your husband has quietly subscribed to a monthly site backup tool under the guise of website optimization. It wasn't about catching her. I'd already done that. This was documentation. For when the moment inevitably came that she'd want to talk about the marriage as if it were a group project I didn't contribute to. I didn't want to argue. I just wanted to slide a flash drive across the table like, "Here's my side." Indexed and timestamped. In the meantime, Olivia was clearly in the middle of what I'd call a low-budget rebranding. Not a full makeover, nothing drastic. Just little changes, each one carefully positioned to make it look like she was shifting, not unraveling. She bought a pair of glasses she didn't need and started using the word curate in sentences where it didn't belong. Our neighbor's garage sale? Kind of a curated chaos. Her inbox? Overwhelmingly curated content. A pile of unread magazines she refused to throw away? That's my inspiration corner. I'm curating a mood. She also changed her email signature to include a quote from a painter she'd never liked before. Something about beauty living in contradictions. Fitting, considering her most consistent contradiction was acting like I wasn't worth speaking to unless someone else was listening. On a Tuesday afternoon, Olivia came into the living room holding a letter. An actual paper letter, which she presented like it had been forged in a mountaintop cave. It was from an organization called Urban Collective Studio, inviting her to speak at an upcoming panel called Breaking Shape, Reimagining Space in Transitional Time. I asked if they were also handing out awards for most unintentionally vague theme title. She didn't laugh. "They're featuring local voices," she said, which I assumed meant they found a few people who work within a 2-mile radius and don't charge for public speaking. "And you want to go?" She blinked. "Why wouldn't I?" "No reason. Just wondering if the panel will include the part where you erased your name from your own projects until someone else gave them attention." That earned me a silence she usually reserved for customer service reps who didn't understand her shipping preferences. She didn't bring it up again, which was fine. I wasn't interested in stopping her. I was just cataloging. In the weeks leading up to the event, she became more performative. Not in a dramatic way, just the steady, subtle presentation of being busier than she was. The dining table was now her workspace, which meant any attempt by me to eat dinner there resulted in a scolding about ruining the flow. Her computer sat open to half-finished grand applications she'd never submit. Her tablet rotated between Pinterest boards of other people's living rooms and articles titled, How to Unblock Your Artistic Voice Without Moving to Berlin. She also started leaving open her email more often, like she wanted me to see that she was getting invitations. Most were automated newsletters from artsy mailing lists that sounded like skincare brands, Aura, Pastel, Tilt. But once, I did see a name I recognized, Teddy Bennett. Yes, him. Apparently, they were now part of the same creative development group, which met once a month to critique works in progress in a safe, supportive space. Which is just a polite way of saying they sat in a room and said vague, positive things while secretly judging everyone else's Instagram following. I knew she'd run back to him eventually. People like Teddy offer just the right level of feedback, meaningless enough not to hurt, flattering enough to sound like support. And Teddy had mastered the rare talent of making compliments sound like long-term investment strategies. I waited, not because I expected drama. Olivia didn't do drama. She did revisions. Quiet, sneaky edits to reality until it sounded better out loud. When the day of the panel finally came, she left wearing a jacket with unnecessary buttons and told me not to wait up. I told her to enjoy her curated contradictions. After she left, I logged into her public artist profile. I'd made a copy of the login back when I helped her set up the domain name. She never changed it. She assumed I wouldn't care. The profile had a new section titled Inspiration and Evolution, where she'd written what I can only describe as a personal essay with the narrative structure of a weather report. It included gems like, I used to believe stability was the goal, but in truth, creativity blooms from tension. My recent work reflects the distance between who we were told to be and who we are becoming. No mention of me, of course. Not by name. Just vague references to partnerships that didn't grow. Apparently, marriage was a houseplant she forgot to water. I printed the page and slid it into the same folder as everything else. I didn't even feel annoyed. I just wanted to have it, in case she ever asked why I wasn't more supportive. Because nothing says support like watching someone rewrite their biography in real time while you're still in the room. That night, she came home late. I was already in bed. She stood in the doorway for a minute like she was debating whether to say something profound. Eventually, she just said, "It went well." I figured. I replied. Silence. Then, "You didn't come. You didn't invite me. I didn't think you'd want to. You thought right." She waited a beat, like I was supposed to backtrack. I didn't. The next morning, she left a brochure on the counter. It was from the event. On the cover was a photo of her standing in front of a canvas I hadn't seen before. It was a new piece. Bright colors. No figures. Just shapes and words layered over each other, like someone had thrown a dictionary into a paint mixer. Its title? Unclaimed Space. She didn't say anything. Just left it there, next to the mail. I took it, flipped it over, and filed it in the folder. Because when the time came, and she finally asked what went wrong, I wanted to be able to hand her the evidence and say, "It's all here. You just didn't notice I was paying attention." The conversation didn't start as a conversation. It started as an observation Olivia left out loud, probably hoping I'd respond with something reflective or poetic. That was her new strategy lately, speak in statements designed to be deep and vague, like she was narrating a documentary about people who whisper their truths into jars and forget to screw the lid on. "You know," she said, pacing near the front window like a property appraiser about to downgrade the value of her own living room, "some people just grow in different directions." I looked up from the cabinet I was pretending to reorganize. "You mean like houseplants?" She sighed, loud enough to summon the spirit of someone who used to tolerate me. "It doesn't have to be hostile." I didn't realize I'd made it hostile. I thought I was going for mildly educational. She ignored that. Walked over to the bookshelf, took out a photography book she'd never read, flipped through it with the solemn grace of someone being filmed for a promo video. I stood up, wiped my hands on a towel I didn't need, and said, "So, is this the part where you say we've had a beautiful journey, but now you want to pursue something more aligned with your evolving sense of self?" She blinked at me. "No, Raymond," she said, "this is the part where I tell you I think we should separate. I'm not trying to hurt you." I nodded, then sat down. The chair creaked in a way that felt unusually honest. "Well," I said, "that's a relief. I was worried we were going to drag this out with months of passive-aggressive laundry placement." She didn't laugh, But she didn't flinch either. That was the difference now. She was immune. To me. To this house. To the version of herself she'd once voluntarily chosen. "I'm serious," she said, placing the untouched book back exactly where it had been, probably because it was safer to arrange objects than respond to them. "I've been thinking about it a long time." "No kidding," I said. "You painted it, titled it, exhibited it, and then put it on a brochure." I figured the paperwork was coming. She finally turned to face me. There it was again, that look that wasn't guilt or regret. It was recognition. The quiet kind. The kind where someone realizes you actually were listening all along, and they just never noticed. "I'm not asking you to be okay with it," she said. "But I think we both know this hasn't felt right for a while." I nodded. "You're right. It hasn't. But what's interesting is that you waited until the last act to give me a line. I didn't know how to bring it up. You brought it up on a podcast." She flinched. "Ah, yes, the podcast." Her debut appearance on Shaping Noise, a local show hosted by a woman named Britt, who once told a barista she couldn't drink caffeine unless it came with oat milk and intention. Olivia's episode was titled Redefining Voice After Silence, which was ironic, considering she talked uninterrupted for 45 minutes. I hadn't even known about the episode until Greg texted me at midnight, screenshotting a quote where Olivia referred to emerging from the shadows of comfort into the light of creative confrontation. He sent it with one word: yikes. I'd listened to the whole thing. Twice. Not out of masochism, but because I was fascinated by how someone could narrate a marriage without using the word husband once. I was the other energy in the room, and a stabilizing force that eventually dulled. My personal favorite was when she described our living space as a well-kept shell of emotional predictability. That shell, by the way, included the plumbing I fixed myself after she refused to call the guy who quoted her $600 to unstick a handle. I didn't bring up the podcast right away. I saved it, filed it in the growing list of things I'd let stack up like unread terms and conditions. But now, sitting there across from her as she began her speech, finally in person instead of into a microphone, I figured the moment had arrived. "You know," I said, "when you told Britt you felt like you were tunneling toward the air, I really hoped that was a metaphor for cleaning the attic." She bit her lip. It wasn't a smile. It was the look of someone trying not to show they were caught off guard by how much you'd seen. That maybe this was going to be less choreographed than expected. "I wasn't trying to erase you," she said. "I was trying to find myself. I think the term is search and redact." She sat down across from me, finally still for the first time in months. It was strange. She looked younger. Not happier. Just free from pretending. Which, in its own twisted way, was a relief. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm just bored of being edited out of the version of events you prefer." She tilted her head. "So what do we do now?" "Depends," I said. "Do you want a formal exit or a graceful fade-out?" "I want honesty." "Great," I said. "You can start by telling your friends I'm not a well-meaning fixture with limited ambition." She looked away. "And in return," I added, "I won't tell them about the time you cried in a Target parking lot because a teenager didn't compliment your reusable tote bag." That one got her. A smirk. Barely visible, but there. We sat there, two people surrounded by the objects of a life that looked organized if you didn't open any drawers. I looked at the bookshelf, the coffee table, the framed print of her painting still hanging in the laundry room. It was ridiculous, this polite debris. "I'll move out," she said. "It's easier." "I'll help with the boxes," I replied. "I'm good at curating now." She laughed once. Not a real laugh, but not fake either. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We didn't even shake hands. She stood, walked to her office, and started making a list. I returned to my cabinet project, finally picking the correct size screw for a handle I hadn't needed to replace in 3 years. We were ending the way we lived most of our marriage, quietly, with a lot of spacing and a mutual commitment to not breaking the furniture. The next week, she was gone. Most of her things went with her. Some didn't. The empty hangers she left behind were color-coded, because of course they were. I kept them, not out of sentiment, just because they were functional. A few weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a flyer for a new exhibit she'd been included in. The title was Reframed, Narratives and Shift. Her piece was featured in the middle. Right next to it was a small caption. It said, "Created during a personal turning point. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel